Hello, hello. Thank you everybody for being here today. Today we're lucky enough to get to speak with Chris Norbury, the author of Straight River. And first and foremost, just you wrote such a thrilling novel. And I think it was one of those novels where we might have known who the bad guy was throughout, but it didn't make it any less thrilling. Because I feel like a lot of times thrillers, they peak on mystery, they peak on detective, but this was in part legal thriller, in part crime, in part you had hackers and everything. I feel like you had all levels, and above and beyond, it took place in, I think, a setting that a lot of us, like Steve and I were just discussing this, a lot of us really considered to be cozy and kind of the antithesis of this. And yeah,
Yeah.
more than anything, I think we could all speak on behalf of Matt. We feel bad for the guy. You really put him through hell. So yeah, so hats off to you there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was one thing I learned way back early on as a mystery is a story where you don't know who did it, you don't know who committed the crime, and the whole goal of the story is to find out who and stop them. Thrillers or suspense ones, you know the bad guys, but you need to see how the good guys are going to defeat them. And if you write it properly, you get that tension and that suspense and that danger and all those sorts of things. So it started off. That one is actually kind of a mystery. You know, who killed Matt's father and the neighbor, but the bigger thing was the thrill part about, okay, now he knows it's this conspiracy, they're trying to kill him, and how does he stay alive, and will he ever be able to stop them?
Yeah, no, and I think just to add to that, the idea, because I think from a reader's perspective, it was really cool and, well, cool might be the wrong word, but it was really interesting to get to read along to see, oh, was this really a suicide? Here are the steps, here are the tips, like
Yeah.
here's kind of how it played out. And I think when it comes down to the actual reasoning behind it, it felt realistic. It felt like you said, this took place after the Great Recession. It
Hmm.
People were desperate, and I mean, frankly, we live in a society where they still are, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But this is by no means outside the realm of of impossible. So I think that also played a really big role, at least from a reader's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing about living in farm country here in Minnesota, we're like the corn belt or the soybean belt or the farm belt, is that you get in tune with the farmers and their good and bad years and how much risk they put into the crop every year. Like we had horrible rain for April, May, and June, and a lot of crops got wiped out because planting season happens in usually March or April. And I thought it was going to be a drought, and all of a sudden we got a year's worth of rain in 3 months, and these fields were underwater. So what was high enough, what survived, is doing great, but there are so many spots you see in the field where it's just totally washed out and dead because the crop was underwater for 2 weeks or more, and that kills the seeds. So the farmer's life is always up and down. In boom times, they make a lot of money, but they have so many years where it's horrible. So I actually started writing this back in 2010, 2011, my first notes and ideas. And that was right after the Great Recession. And the farmers were having trouble then. But it's kind of an up and down cycle. So I didn't actually publish that book until 2019. But it's easy to say, well, between 2010 and 2019, there were probably two up and down cycles where the farm prices are bad and the land values are bad and they can't get loans for things. So I kind of changed my description and say it's just, a farming crisis, which kind of happens every 5 years in this country.
It's that kind of expertise in the subject matter that I think elevated this above just other thrillers. And I know that you've got a background in music. Obviously, you're a teacher, right? And
Yes.
a background in things like farming and stuff. So,
Yeah.
like, it sounds like it was a pretty deliberate decision to write what you knew, what you were an expert in your own terms. I think I love reading a book where you learn things. I learned a lot about farming reading this book. I learned a lot about music.
I'm a city kid. I just happen to live in now a smallish town in the farm country, but I didn't know very much about it. I'd been on a farm twice in my life when I was a little kid, but I did have a friend who agreed to sit down with me over a cup of coffee one day and he's kind of a retired gentleman farmer. He grew up on a farm, but he worked for an insurance company. But he's retired now and has got about 100 or so acres that he plants. And I picked his brain about all these farming details. I said, is this reasonable for land prices? Crop insurance, all these sorts of things, the weather, the all the details on that. So I really reached out to the expert. And then as far as the music part goes, that's always been part of my life. So when I thought about writing a book, I thought, what would be a different kind of a hook compared with another hero in a thriller or a crime story? And the old adage, write what you know. And I thought, well, it might be interesting to have a musician come into this problem and use his musical skills for whatever his for crime solving and things like that. So I really worked on that to get him, his sight reading ability, his keen ear, his improvisation skills. I use those throughout all three books. And it's a little bit different approach. And my readers have enjoyed reading about them. And some of them say, boy, I learned a little bit about music today. And, I put in all the song references and things like that. So that was kind of fun too, for the readers to be able to actually go to YouTube and listen to the soundtracks of the music I put into each book.
It's just, yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I think it's also the case of just, it adds more realism to it. Like you said, you're writing what you have the experience as the music teacher. And I think there's just so many elements of it that were so much more in depth, like Steve was saying, that you otherwise wouldn't have anticipated. And I think also being from the States myself, I know that a lot of the smaller towns are essentially always run by like one family. There's always like one hot shot in town who's in charge. And I think that's what really kind of hit me with this story, was you had that same idea and you had the greed of it all really coming to a head because, oh yeah, this guy's corrupted because of this guy's corrupted because of that. But when you're in a town of like 1,000 people, who else are you gonna go to? The big city doesn't care, right? This you're putting a lot of faith in one or two people.
You are, yeah, absolutely. Because the whole reason Matt went on the run is because he kind of figured out quick that the police chief was a crook. And he couldn't even trust his own boyhood friend, the sergeant on the police force. He wanted to, but he wasn't sure about it because he was kind of getting stonewalled. And then he sort of figured out that the chief was in on something, and said, well, if he's in on it, I can't trust anybody. And that's why he ran for the woods, literally, at the end of the book, was because they've accused him of murder and he didn't do it and all this sort of thing. So he just had this survival mode of, I can't trust anybody except myself, so I need to get away. And in the second book, he ends up in the Boundary Waters, the Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota, living there, totally isolated from everybody, except he's got one little connection to supplies and things like that. So when I gave him all those troubles, I thought, well, my tagline for this book is basically I take a normal, happy, successful guy and I ruin his life. And it just kind of snowballed into how far do I need to ruin it for him to really, turn into this fearful fugitive who doesn't trust anybody. And I got a lot of flack from that, actually, for killing too many people in the story. And I said, no, I just felt like the right thing to do is to, kill who I killed.
But it wasn't just the fact that you killed them. It was how you killed them. And I'm sorry, if anybody's made it 15 minutes into an interview about the book and haven't read the book, go back and read the book because there will be spoilers. Like when I'm sure people have, but when you killed his, I apologize for forgetting, but ex-wife or fiance, girlfriend, the fact that he was the one that killed her. So it in part, it's his life is being ruined by forces outside of his control. But in that instance, he was doing it to himself.
Yeah.
How much of that was he really in control of?
Yeah. And that was, for me, that was the key scene. And I really debated about putting that in. But I thought, okay, this is the final step because, it was her idea to divorce him. So he never wanted to get divorced. they got back together. The flames rekindled. He thought, oh boy, if I can get through this, maybe we have a chance. And so he never was out of love with her, and she was starting to fall back in love with him. And when this happened and he unknowingly pulled the trigger on her, it was just devastating. And that kind of put him over the edge, where he thought, I just gotta, I gotta cut my losses and go back and regroup at the very least. But that was really hard. That's the one I got the most pushback on, was, why did you kill Diane? Why did you kill off Diane? So, but I thought, what better way to add on all that guilt for his trying to do well than to make him believe that he actually killed the person he loved most in the world.
poor Matt Lanier. We need a Facebook group or something for this guy to go to bat for him. Was it? I really wanted to talk about Matt Lanier. I think as a character, he's great. It's something a bit different than what you would get in most of, like the norm in this genre, so to speak. What I wanted to ask was how much of his DNA came from other sleuths, like if you've got a favorite, like like Sherlock Holmes or something like that. I felt a couple of wee nods to some of the sleuths, the way that he tracks people in scenes and stuff. Was there anything that really inspired you when you were making him?
No, the only thing I can say is that Matt is the musician I wish I could have been. He's like the ultimate guy, because he's got he's equally talented at jazz and classical, and so I think of musicians like Wynton Marsalis, who's a trumpet player, one of the all-time greats, and I was a trumpet player, so he was one of my idols. And the guy is an absolute genius. He can play the best jazz in the world, and he is one of the best classical trumpet players you'll ever hear in your life. So I wanted Matt to be that sort of a musician, superstar in jazz and a superstar in classical, even though a little bit scaled down playing bass. But just kind of getting inspired by all the great musicians who are everywhere. It's like there are great athletes everywhere. There are great writers everywhere. There are great artists of all sorts everywhere, but you don't know about them because they don't choose to go for the big stardom, the worldwide fame and that sort of thing. But they are consummate musicians. In my case, he's a consummate musician, but only really known in the Twin Cities, other than a few jazz fans and things like that. So it was mainly just trying to do sort of a representative musical genius who is kind of maybe overlooked, or not, appreciated for his real talent, because that musicians, they just kind of quietly go about doing their business, and they play great, and we love to hear them, but they don't have these larger than life personas in many cases. So it was just that sort of an approach.
And tell us a little bit about the decision to set it in the Midwest specifically. Given it's it's obviously not somewhere that you see a lot of this kind of story, but I do love kind of like more rural settings. See, like Fargo and things like that, like kind of not low stakes, but lower stakes things that then start blowing out of proportion. Was that just like a deliberate choice?
It was a deliberate choice. When I was first brainstorming the series, I sat down with my wife on our sofa and I said, well, I like mysteries, I like thrillers, maybe I'd like to write a thriller. I like conspiracy, so maybe I can figure out a conspiracy. Why not set it in Minnesota? Because it's a beautiful state. Even though it's considered to be very non-diverse, it's more diverse by the day. And you've also got extremes in weather. We probably have the most extreme weather in the country, in the lower 48 states. And you've got farmland, you've got big cities, the Twin Cities, you've got remote areas up in the northern half of the state, you've got lakes, you've got all sorts of weather events that can happen. And my second book, I actually set it in winter, the worst winter I could remember, and had the weather actually be a character in the plot, because when these blizzards blow in, up on the north shore of Lake Superior in that pointy arrowhead part, pretty much everything stops because there's one main road from Duluth up to the Canadian border, and if it's snow covered, nobody goes anywhere, and so the police can't respond, the fire people can't respond. So I thought, well, I've got all this diverse stuff right here, and I know the state really well. I've been around most of it, and especially that difference between the southern farmland and the urban Twin Cities. That's quite a dichotomy. You have really pretty conservative people down here, but then you've got some of the most liberal people in the nation in the Twin Cities. So you can always work in that contrast as well. So it was a pretty easy choice. Once again, kind of a write what you know approach.
It's interesting because off the top of my head, I believe you're the third author we featured from Minnesota.
Oh.
There's some
there's a lot of good ones here.
Yeah. Because Will Tinkham wrote the Teddy and Bear Show, and that what took place in Minnesota. And then Ian Young wrote The Automaton, which didn't take place in Minnesota per se, but he's also from Minnesota. It's just interesting bit there. One of the things I wanted to just mention that we talked about before is that when it comes down to, you have the crook and then you have the hitman and all of that that's kind of running the show. I thought it was a really nice juxtaposition as we're coming out of the Great Recession. Everybody is struggling. Everyone's trying to make ends meet. But then you have one guy who is just bulldozing everybody in their way to get so much more than they could ever need.
Right.
And at that point, it's no longer, you have people fighting for survival, fighting to live. And then you have people not even fighting for greed, fighting for power.
Yeah.
And it was just based on the situation we find ourselves in today. It felt very real in that moment.
That was kind of a fun thing to do. I don't know if you remember the line, but like I said, when I started writing this in about 2010, 2011, I was describing Leland SMI, the real estate tycoon. I think somebody was describing him to Matt, and they said, well, he's basically Donald Trump without the hair. And now Donald Trump is proving us, more than worthy of his greediness and all that sort of stuff. I don't want to get into politics.
Yeah, no, I get it.
That was my comparison. But it kind of illustrates that wealth gap that we're experiencing, where the richest 1% they keep getting billions and billions and billions off of the regular people, and it's only gotten worse in the 14 years since I started writing the book. And it's easy to root for the underdogs when they're going up against the wealthiest 1%. It wasn't like I took advantage of that to get people sympathetic, but it's a great contrast to see how much power can be wielded by one man in pursuit of greed or whatever. It was basically greed for him. He thought, well, maybe he just kind of wanted to pull off this big deal to soak up all this farmland and then sell it to the feds, down the road, several years, and rake billions and pull off something akin to the Louisiana Purchase almost, but not that scale. But and it kind of go down in history as maybe after he's long gone, they'll say, oh, Smythe was the guy who pulled off this big coup and got all this land for free for the feds. So yeah, it was fun to do that, but it is a social commentary, very subtle, but it's a social commentary for me of how much power the rich truly have right now.
And just to add to that, I feel especially with, and again, apologies if I messed this up, but the farmer that was killed, and then with his widow going after saying he didn't kill himself, this and that, was a Swedish immigrant, if I remember correctly.
Norwegian, yeah.
Norwegian, sorry.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah.
Scandinavian.
Either way. Scandinavian, yeah.
And it was, the big guy has all the resources in the world, and these people have local law enforcement. And if the local law enforcement turn them down, they have nowhere else to turn. So
that's right.
It's good story, good telling of people coming together for the greater good. And But at the same time, you still had the prejudices. Like when Matt went to go meet his father's friends and this and that, and they were all giving him dirt for being the city,
Yeah,
and that for being
yeah,
born.
yeah. It's there's definitely that small town. I lived up in a place in northern Minnesota, up near Duluth, when I was teaching, a town of about 800 people, and there is a woman down the block who had a student who was in my band, just an absolute brilliant kid, wonderful, and the parents were fantastic, and she actually ran for mayor of the town, and she was elected, and they had been there, probably since her son was born or early on, so maybe got there 10 years before I got there. And I was talking to her and she said, well, I'm the mayor of the town, but I still don't feel like I belong because our family will always be outsiders because we were not born and raised in Carleton, Minnesota. We came from the Twin Cities, especially, coming from the Twin Cities, what are these big city folks doing up in our town? And so very, very social structure system of, who are the townies and who are the outsiders and things like that. And very similar in Straight River. It's in a small town, and you've got the old established people who've been there for literally since Minnesota was founded back in the 1850s. They were the first settlers, and once you start farming your land, you put down roots, and there's 3 and 4 and 5 generation farmers on this land. And to them, they're always the originals. And now all these other people are coming in. We have a good sized Somali population in Owatonna, where I live, which is fictional Straight River. We have a fairly large Hispanic population. And there's all this kind of a changing of the guard, similar to the entire country. We're becoming more diversified. But that resistance to anything new, new people, new ideas, new things, it's really, really strong in these smaller towns because they know they don't want to have to deal with change because it's been the same way for so long that any change is just huge to them.
And just to add to that, for the longest time as well, the lack of change is what benefited them the most.
Yeah, yeah. And why mess with, why fix it if it ain't broke? They're perfectly happy going on with their lives and kind of isolated from the rest of the world. So they didn't know that the rest of the world's got all these problems. Maybe didn't want to know that the rest of the world has all these problems because their little community, things were humming along. It wasn't necessarily perfect, wasn't spectacular, but they were used to it and comfortable, and they were surviving.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about there. I feel like we've covered such a broad range of topics.
Yeah.
So if I could bring us back to the book, tell us a little bit about how you keep tension going, not just from sequence to sequence, because the action scenes I thought were wonderful in this. Mm-hmm. But I know that this isn't Matt Lanier's only outing. How do you keep that kind of tension going from book to book?
When I finished Straight River, I left it open ended and thought, okay, let's have him go up against these guys because basically his one of his fatal flaws is that he refuses to lose, and he has always been a winner and can't accept defeat, so he's not going to give up. Unfortunately, it's cost him dearly, but he's not going to give up, so he's going to keep on fighting. So I thought, okay, keep that in the background, and then for Castle Danger, shift the scene, shift the whole idea. So he's got this sort of a side story. That's basically a fugitive story. He's a fugitive, and this woman who ends up actually saving his life is a fugitive from her evil, horrible husband. So then I have the hitman for Leland Smythe tracking Matt down because they figure out where he is. It's kind of subtle, but the Smythe is such a brilliant guy that he can tell where Matt is. So he sends the hitman after him. The evil husband shows up with the woman, and now Matt is thinking, boy, she's really attractive, and she saved my life, and all these sorts of things. But I also have to save myself, number one. So I've got the hitman and the evil husband kind of converging on the two of them. And Matt's big decision is, do I stay or do I go? Because once again, he's trained and was raised to help others before yourself. So he has to decide, do I help this woman, save her son, who I really like too, he's just a wonderful kid, or do I just run and hide again? So I think kind of when I introduce the hitman showing up and then we find out how bad the husband is, there is that underlying tension that Matt's going to have to decide something sooner or later. And I just sort of build that up. So that was kind of an easy tension builder, because you sort of hint at what's going to happen, and people know that, oh, it's getting worse, it's getting worse. And then that book ends. He still hasn't stopped the conspiracy. And I'll give you a spoiler alert, he does save the day for the woman and her son. It's very ugly, but it works. But then he says, okay, I can't stay here anymore because this is a small town and these people are dead and there's all sorts of problems. So he retreats again to a different place and decides to go back to Minneapolis and hide kind of in plain sight as a homeless street musician. And he meets some friends down there and gets involved. And then that's a whole other dynamic, because now he's got the cover of a couple million people, but he's basically got no resources or anything whatsoever. Nobody believes him. And then he's so desperate, he decides to get out totally. He wants to get a new identity, new social security number, so he can go somewhere, change his name, get a job, and just go on with his life. But as circumstance happened, he finally convinces, not of his own doing so much, he finally convinces one of the bad guys to believe him, that he's telling the truth and Smythe is the crook, and that one guy knows somebody and flips the connection. So then you've got the tension of, is Matt going to literally kill himself or get himself killed? We watch this downward spiral in the beginning of the third book, and then all of a sudden he gets this one little ray of hope, and the tension becomes, is this enough? Can he take this one little thread or this ray of hope and build on it and figure out, how can we stop this guy? And as it turns out, the guy who flips and believes him knows the right people, and they start getting involved. But Matt still has to do some of the heavy lifting, but he finally saves the day. So it's always kind of the tension, I guess. The underlying theme is, what's next? What else is going to go wrong? Or what else might he get a ray of hope? Might something change positively for him? Because after the first book, I hope everybody's rooting for him to survive. But once he survives the first book, then it's like, okay, he still is, in this horrible situation. Can he get himself out of it?
And I really want to see him be happy. Oh, the man's been through some terrible times. Speaking of Matt, I always like to ask this, especially with kind of heavily character-focused books. Who would you cast if you were going to have a film made?
I do not know. I have agonized over that for years now, actually. The only person I had in my mind almost immediately when I developed the character was Smythe, Leland SMI. And my ideal actor to portray him would be Stanley Tucci, probably back about 20 years ago when he was 45, 50ish, because that's Smythe's age. He just had that disdainful air about him when he's playing a certain character, and he's got the bald head and kind of the short and medium build, not a big guy. Looks smart, but looks also kind of cunning and conniving and all that sort of thing. So that was the only person that I came up with a character, an actor portrayer for. So I'm still open to suggestions on Matt. He would be kind of a ruggedly good-looking guy, but like he's a musician to start, so he's not a bodybuilder. Yeah. He's not a superhero build, but I don't know, somebody like maybe Ryan Gosling or somebody who is more of an everyday.
I got kind of Jake Gyllenhaal was what I was getting in my head.
Jake Gyllenhaal is from Minnesota or North Dakota or someplace. Yeah, some sort of a a wholesome, good-looking type of guy. Decent size, but not a rock hard, Dwayne Johnson or Schwarzenegger or anything like that. Because because musicians tend to be a little bit on the soft side. They don't do a lot of exercising other than drummers are always in great shape because they're burning about 5,000 calories a night. But other than that, they just sit around and play their instruments a lot.
It's really nice to see as well, and this is something I've noticed within self-publishing. A lot of the stories also have dedicated soundtracks. And I know we touched on this earlier. I don't know. I don't really have anything to say about it. I just think it's a really unique thing that a lot of the traditional published stories, at least the ones I read growing up, never incorporated it, never used it as a resource or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I think especially since Matt has this wilderness streak in him and everything, you'd get very different songs, I believe.
Oh yeah, yeah. And that was, I guess, a conscious decision because when I put most of that music in, it was kind of at important moments of the plot when he's, doing whatever he's doing. And to me, that's a musician thing because I have always got a song popping into my head. And just every day I'll have, like the rest of the day, I'll have 5 or 10 songs that'll pop into my head. I won't know how they get in there. They just get in there. And I'm thinking about them probably because of what I happen to be doing at the time. So I thought, well, I'll translate that to the book and let people know that musicians are like this. We always have songs coming into our head. We might hear a rhythm on something. We might hear a little bit of a piece of music from a commercial, and that'll make us think of something else. So it's a musical thing. And I thought, well, why not, instead of just put the title in there like I did, why not actually find a track of that tune and put it on a soundtrack so people can go and listen to it if they're not familiar with it, especially, and go, oh yeah, the Ride of the Valkyries, which one I used in the second book. But I think yeah, I can't recall the tunes off my top of my head, but in a situation, he's thinking something, doing something, and all of a sudden a tune that's kind of related pops into his head. And that's the way it is for me and many musicians. I can't speak for all of us, but it's kind of an annoying thing sometimes because you get these songs you really don't like stuck in your head all day, and oh shoot, I have to think of something else to get my mind off of that one.
Those commercial jingles, yeah, they'll get you for sure.
Yeah.
I hate being that person. The time is ticking. We have a little over 2 minutes left, and I wanted to ask, obviously the sequel to this is Castle Danger. I assume we would recommend that to read next, but if you were a reader and they love the story, what's the best way they can get a hold of you? What should they read next? Where do they go?
Everything starts at my website, chrisnorbury.com. You can check me out there. Links to all my books, schedule events if you live in the Minnesota area, or if you happen to be visiting from Great Britain, come on over. I'd love to talk to a fellow Brit if they want that, or not a fellow Brit, but someone who's from there. And then definitely the books, you can read them standalone, but it's much easier to start with Straight River, and then Castle Danger is the second. Dangerous Straits is the third. I am working on a fourth one. And spoiler alert, Matt does survive the first 3 books, so he will be in a fourth. It'll take a while. And
Also, you had us on our toes there.
Yeah, and other than that, I've got a short story coming out in an anthology this fall, and I've got a group of writers and I are working on this kind of a five main character medical thriller that we're trying to write together. But I don't know what we're going to do with it when we finish it, but we're working on that also. But go to my website, and that's where everything starts, and you can find links to Facebook and Twitter and those things too, or X.
And we'll put all of that in the description below. But got 30 seconds left. More than anything, thank you again so much for being here. If somehow you've made it through the entire interview and you forgot, the story was Straight River by Chris Norbury. And yes, thank you again. Had an absolutely wonderful time, and just participating means a lot to us.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you guys. Good luck with your venture. I think it's a great idea, and I hope you succeed beyond your wildest dreams.
Thank you again.
Thanks, man. Very well.
Thank you.